Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PBSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with a brand new Star Wars story. Today we'll discover what would have happened had Thrawn, the legendary strategist, been a Sith Lord. Would he have been trained by Sidious and become his new apprentice, or would he start a legacy of his own? Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of the Pente Control team. If you want a chance to win in our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video, and I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins on the planet Rentor, in the unknown regions of the galaxy. Born as Mithra Nurundo, the Chiss child was born in 59 BBY. This child would eventually become known as Thrawn, but he was born as someone special, an especially high midichlorian count and a tendency to be able to use the Force. While Thrawn didn't know that, nor did his parents, it would become a discovery later in his life. Thrawn was born into a poor family, a part of the Chiss ascendancy. While most of the galaxy didn't know about the Chiss, it made perfect sense. They existed in the unknown regions of the galaxy. Luckily for Thrawn, he had an older sister. Her name was Shivu Correcto Arocto, or simply Kivu. She was too blessed with his ability to wield the Force. It was natural for her, but when she was 5 and Thrawn was 3, she would become a Skywalker navigator. In the unknown regions, the Chiss ascendancy lacked technology. This lack of technology made it hard to survive, especially since the unknown regions were filled with chaos and dangerous terrains. The ability to use the Force made these Skywalkers particularly important to the Chiss, though for Kivu, there was a slight issue. Chiss girls seemed to adopt these Force-sensitive abilities, and by the time they got older, they would lose it. It was possible it could be for a number of reasons, but no one truly knew. It may have to do with just the genetic makeup of the Chiss, but for now, as a child, Kivu had the ability of third sight, and it was referred to by the Chiss as such. When Thrawn and Kivu were of age, they went to school. They were taught about their civilization and how the Chiss homeworld had a population of billions, though this was a lie. Celia froze over thousands of years beforehand, mostly because the star had been dying in its solar system, which led to a mass migration away from the planet, leaving Celia dormant and most of the population gone. While this history lesson would eventually reveal its truth to Thrawn, it didn't matter to him, because as he continued to age, he would eventually attend an academy on Rentor. Thrawn's advanced abilities and mindset allowed him to be found by a patriarchal family known commonly as Thraki. This is where Thrawn would adopt the name of Thrawn in 39 BBY in his early 20s, from the Thraki. For most of Thrawn's early life, he would bounce between academies. After being on Rentor, he would move to Naporor to continue his training. All along, Thrawn had very little knowledge of how Force-attuned he truly was, and while it would eventually surprise even him, it didn't matter. He was a cadet, and he was focused on his studies and his performances. This focus landed him at the Tarhim Academy, where he would consistently score among his top classes. Thrawn was quite brilliant. His mind was certainly exceptional, and he proved in his chances to succeed. Every time Thrawn was tested, he outperformed peers who were even older than him. This did create a bit of discrepancy within the academy though, because they believed he was cheating. This of course was the opposite, and Thrawn was able to prove his innocence in simulations, which could not be cheated on. Thrawn continued to thrive and spend his free time analyzing art and learning alien military tactics. Thrawn saw these little snippets of other species as a perfect means to understand them. Thrawn knew more than anyone that getting to the heart of an opponent allowed you to best them at any point. Thrawn was able to graduate from the academy in 37 BBY, but his success didn't stop there, as he became a Chiss officer and excelled through the ranks of the Ascendancy, still not made aware of the power that sat within him. Though Thrawn was tasked with keeping the Skywalker core from being discovered by the rest of the unknown regions. They were very important for the growth and their own protection in the chaotic areas of space. Eventually, as the years passed, during one of Thrawn's command runs in the unknown regions, they got a distress signal from a planet not too far away from them. It was a planet that hadn't been visited by anyone from the Chiss Ascendancy. Thrawn moved his ship out of formation and moved over to the location of this planet. The distress signal seemed like it popped out of nowhere. Thrawn wanted to check it out because he believed it could be something important. While the Chiss were rather strict on breaking formation, this operation was approved by the Fleet Admiral. All fault would go back to him if there just happened to be an issue with this. Thrawn and his ship eventually exited hyperspace. He would take a personal shuttle down to the dreary planet and follow the distress signal until he found himself outside of a massive structure. The sight was unbelievable. It was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Thrawn stepped forward as he took in the sight of this hulking building. He pulled his blaster from his belt and stepped forward as he searched for any signs of life. The building was full of massive structures, statues of some sort. None of it looked to be familiar to Thrawn. As he crept in further, hearing the sounds of echoes traveling throughout this ancient temple, Thrawn was very focused on what lay ahead of him. If he took a wrong step, he could be jeopardized and killed. Thrawn looked down into a massive hole in the floor and saw chains the size of starships that led further down into what appeared to be a tomb. Thrawn found a lift of sorts, so he let it carry him down further into this tomb. There was a sound of coughing coming from one of the rooms as the sound of glass shattering filled the entire facility. Thrawn walked around the corner and he kept hearing distant noises as they sounded like they were surrounding him. Thrawn tipped over something as he looked over and saw a melted face across a tomb of some sorts. Thrawn stepped back as he shined a light on it. There was a language, but he couldn't read it, nor could he understand what it was. But it was old, as he wiped dust from the tomb and looked at it. On top of the tomb was a weirdly shaped object. Thrawn reached for it and grabbed it. It was propped up on a small pedestal, and Thrawn wanted to see what it was, as he dusted off the silver object. Holding it in his right hand, he ignited the weapon as a crimson blade shot from the hilt, slicing open part of Thrawn's face. He didn't know what it was as he dropped the blade and it turned off. Thrawn let out a terrible howl as his face was filled with agony. A loud voice screamed out. Thrawn tried to duck for cover as best he could, but then he heard the sound of some sort of weapon of the same type ignite, as he looked around the corner and saw a massive beast walk towards him. It was more of a man, but it was rather unhinged. He looked badly damaged and he looked extremely angry. The taller man looked across the shadows as a crimson blade lit a shadow across the damaged face. The man walked towards the sound of the lightsaber as he limped forward. Thrawn got behind cover as he listened to the footsteps get closer and closer. Now Thrawn was a fighter, but he was currently unable to see. The brightness from the weapon blinded him. Though the cut didn't pass into his eye, it was more or less just his face getting the light and being semi-blinded by it because of how bright it was. Especially because this tomb was extremely dark and Thrawn had adjusted his eyes to such a darkness. The voice spoke out. He said that he could feel Thrawn's presence. Thrawn had no clue what that meant, and then the voice said that Thrawn was powerful with the Force, demanding that Thrawn come out from hiding. If he came out, he would be spared, but if this man found him, then he would be killed on sight. Thrawn knew he couldn't take the chance as he spoke up, telling the taller man that he saw a distress signal. He didn't mean any harm. The man asked what distress signal that he was referring to. Thrawn stood up and walked around the edge as the taller man noticed the blue skin of the Chiss leader. He asked where the man was from, as Thrawn told him he was from the planet Rentor. The taller man told Thrawn he didn't know where that was. He wasn't from the unknown regions. Thrawn stepped forward as the tall man leaned down and grabbed the lightsaber from the ground. He asked Thrawn to follow him as he asked what Thrawn's name was. Thrawn addressed himself as such as he followed the taller man, who continued to limp down the walkway. Thrawn asked what had happened to him, as the taller man growled. He said the fool and the fools who followed him happened. The man sat down in a small lab as he growled. He kept his hood over his head. He looked at Thrawn and asked about the distress signal he spoke of. Thrawn said that one of the Skywalkers had reported distress signals coming from this planet. So they came to Exegol to see if there's anyone in danger. The tall man grunted, asking what a Skywalker was. Thrawn told him that they were Force-sensitive girls who could use Third Eye to help them guide ships through the Chaos Zone. The tall man scoffed at this resolution to simple navigation, but then he looked back down and picked up the broken glass. He told Thrawn that he sent no distress signal. He wanted to stay quiet as he could. Thrawn asked why the man said he had a fool and the fools that followed him. The man said that he had an apprentice that tried to kill him, but he failed. Now he's been hiding here on Exegol for too long, trying to avoid running into that same apprentice. It wasn't out of fear, just waiting for the proper moment to strike. The taller man asked why he picked up the lightsaber and why he would cut himself with the weapon. Thrawn admitted that he didn't know how to use it and accidentally turned it on. He had no idea it was a weapon, he just thought it to be a relic or a piece of art. The man asked why Thrawn was so interested in relics. Thrawn expressed it was a key to understanding one's opponent. Thrawn also said that having trophies, art, or relics provided more knowledge to everything in the galaxy, for if you knew one opponent's weakness, you knew multiple. The man respected it as Thrawn asked him what his name was. The taller man said his name was Hego Damask II. Thrawn asked where Hego was from, and he told him he was from Scipio. Hego then told Thrawn that he went by another name though, a name which was why he was here, in this position. Thrawn perked his head around curiously, as Hego told Thrawn that he was a Sith Lord by the name of Plagueis. Thrawn never heard of the Sith, and there was no reason for shock value into hearing someone call themselves a Sith Lord. Plagueis looked at Thrawn almost confusedly. He was surprised that Thrawn didn't budge. He respected it, though it wasn't normal for Plagueis to tell anyone he was a Sith, but they did have a legacy, most of which was lost to time. Plagueis stood up and asked if Thrawn knew the ways of the Force. Thrawn expressed that his sister used to be Force-sensitive, though as she matured, she lost her ability to use the Force. Thrawn expressed he never believed that he was Force-sensitive himself. Plagueis asked how it was possible for his sister to lose Force sensitivity. Thrawn said that Kivu was much like any other girl from Rentor. They grew up as a Skywalker, and then they aged out of being able to use the Force as such. Plagueis was curious if Thrawn knew how powerful he was. The Sith Lord grabbed a small device and asked his young friend if he could prick him with the device real quick. Thrawn asked what the device was for, as Plagueis explained it was so that he could find the midichlorian count of the young Chiss man. Thrawn consented as the Dark Lord pricked Thrawn's finger and uploaded the data into a small, rudimentary machine next to him. Thrawn looked at Plagueis' wounds and asked what had happened to him and why he'd seemed to be so injured. Plagueis stood tall and then looked off into the corner of the room. He started to speak. As he said, he was one of the most powerful beings in the entire galaxy. He had killed his master and then he adopted his own student. Sheev Palpatine was a great student. He was skilled, cunning, and everything a master would want to see their student become. He was the perfect Sith. He killed his entire family when he was just a boy, and that hatred fueled him in his training. Though Palpatine was special, he had an especially high midichlorian count, and it played a part in the power that he had as an individual. Plagueis continued expressing to him that his student by the name Sidious learned as much as he could about the Force. It was powerful, and the dark side allowed the two of them to have intangible power. They were able to even create life, though it was at once that this life vanished into the galaxy. Plagueis had no clue how to even find the life that he and Palpatine created. Plagueis expressed that he taught his student everything he knew about the dark side. Though there was one thing Plagueis did not tell Palpatine though. He told him that there was a way he could escape mortality, but not that he had figured out how to do it. Plagueis figured to keep it to himself so that he could stay alive in case Palpatine tried to kill him, which inevitably happened. Plagueis explained that Sidious was brilliant, but he was cocky. He saw the grand plan, but he never saw the minute details of Plagueis' brilliant design. The Sith Lord intended for this to happen, and while the healing process was difficult, he allowed Sidious to finish his plans for him. Plagueis had the full intention of coming back and killing Sidious in the future when he let his guard down. Thrawn asked why Sidious would try and kill him. Plagueis expressed that it was the night that Sheev became Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The night Palpatine got Plagueis drunk and tried to assassinate him in his sleep. It wasn't anything he could have prepared for, but it was something he fell for. Plagueis expressed disappointment that Sidious was too cowardly to try and kill him like a true Sith. Thrawn asked what Plagueis meant, as the Sith Lord expressed that the Sith way would have been to face him like a true opponent, fight him in combat through a duel, and yet Sidious cowered away from that. Plagueis expressed he came back to Exegol so that he could heal himself and then abandon the rule of Tuel to build an army of Sith so that they could serve him and this new empire that Sidious would eventually instate. Plagueis asked Thrawn if he and Kivu would like the opportunity to be a part of that new era. The three of them could lead respectively and split the leadership of their new empire into thirds. Thrawn wasn't necessarily power hungry, and neither was Kivu. So he asked what the catch was. He wanted to know why Plagueis was so eager to have him and Kivu join the Sith. Plagueis turned around and took out a beeping midichlorian counter as he analyzed the sample that he took from Thrawn. The same sample showed that Thrawn had a higher midichlorian count than Sheev did. Plagueis was thoroughly impressed as he told Thrawn that he had the potential for greatness. He pulled the little tablet around and showed Thrawn, as if Thrawn knew exactly what he was looking at. Plagueis explained that Thrawn had a midichlorian count of 24,500. Thrawn still had no clue what this meant, but Plagueis spelled it out for him. He told Thrawn that his physical attributes and cunning mind for strategy, based on the little that Plagueis knew about Thrawn, told him that he would make a fine Sith Lord, alongside of the midichlorian count, which was beyond high. One Sith Lord that would have no issue fighting any known being in the galaxy. Though with Anakin Skywalker not being known to Plagueis, he didn't know there was an actual challenge to Thrawn and what he could become. Thrawn asked why he would want to join Plagueis. The Sith Lord told him that he could train him and his sister until the age of the Empire, and then they could take their seats on the throne of the galaxy. Thrawn saw this opportunity as something he could seize upon, but he was extremely loyal to his people. Plagueis gave Thrawn an idea, though. He suggested that he train with Plagueis for a month with Kivu, and then he would decide if he wanted to stay a Sith, or forget he ever interacted with the Sith Lord. Plagueis expressed that part of that deal would be that he could use the lightsaber of the dead Sith that he found earlier. Thrawn nodded his head. He saw this as a reasonable accord. Thrawn would contact his sister, and she too would make her way to Exegol. While Thrawn and Plagueis waited for Kivu's arrival, Plagueis told Thrawn about some of the Sith morals. Thrawn would be questionable of some of them, but for the most part it seemed as if the Sith knew how to win. While it seemed a bit cruel, their understanding of the Force was to use it for power. Plagueis also offered that once they secured power of the galaxy, he would have no issue with assisting the Chiss Ascendancy achieve power in the unknown regions. Thrawn was content with that. After all, he was dedicated to restoring power to the Chiss in the unknown regions for the moment. Thrawn also learned about the ancient Jedi Order. They were certainly not a fun-sounding group of people. The Jedi extinguished the Sith in the ancient days, and the Sith were forced into hiding. The Jedi and Thrawn's opinions seemed to be corrupt. They looked as if they held power in the galaxy, and didn't obey their own mandate to the people of said galaxy. Thrawn saw this as dishonorable. But there was one issue Thrawn had with the Sith, and that was their historical lack of control. Plagueis was curious as to why Thrawn's issue with this was, as he admitted that he was in favor of a controlling party, not a warring one. Thrawn continued, stating that the Sith were always trying to kill one another. Then how could they possibly hope to achieve, let alone hold power in the galaxy? In this brief history lesson, it seemed as if the Sith were constantly trying to kill their teachers and anyone that threatened them or made them feel threatened. Plagueis knew this, of course. Every Sith over the last millennia knew this. Plagueis stated that it was the way of the Sith. Thrawn told Plagueis that it was the reason why the Jedi were all-powerful. Plagueis didn't quite understand. He expressed that the Jedi were supposed to be the ones that were ignorant. Thrawn expressed that the Sith were ignorant, to not be ignorant of the Jedi. It was their undermining. Thrawn said from what he could perceive, it seemed as if the Sith were more concerned about the Jedi than themselves, believing that the Jedi were stupid or ignorant for their code or their ethics, but it made them stay in power. Thrawn continued tearing down the establishment of what the Sith were, saying that their lack of ethics and their weak code allowed them to fluctuate. While Thrawn didn't know the full in-depth story of the Sith, he wasn't wrong. Plagueis was a bit flustered, even a bit annoyed. The Sith of the past whom he looked up to seemed to be just as ignorant as him. No one could live forever, but surely the Sith could have stayed in power or should have stayed in power and not the Jedi. Thrawn watched Plagueis decipher everything that he just said as he quietly accessorized the lightsaber that left a mark across his face. Plagueis looked up as he agreed that Thrawn was right about the Sith, and while it was brute honesty, it was the truth about the Sith. And it would be exactly why the Sith, like Palpatine, couldn't exist. Plagueis knew how to twist the story back around, as he admitted that the Sith were too power-hungry for their own good. Thrawn then rebutted, asking why Plagueis stood in line of power. Thrawn admitted that Plagueis killed his own master, and then wasn't surprised when Sidious did the same. Plagueis rebuked this statement by suggesting that he killed his master because his master didn't have the vision. He didn't have the ability to take down the Jedi. Plagueis believed that if he could train an apprentice to have equal power and equal respect, they could both rule the galaxy together and wipe out their common enemy. Assuming they could do that, he would have been ready to fight his student in case they had a disagreement. Thrawn respectfully called Plagueis a hypocrite then. Plagueis again rebuked this by saying that this new Sith Order the three of them could establish, they could change this legacy of the Sith. In all honesty, Thrawn wasn't too enthralled with the Sith or their ways. He was just ready to learn what he could and forget about them after a month. Thrawn was smart enough to train himself, and he believed it wouldn't be too difficult to train himself once he had a foundation. He would put up with Plagueis for the time being, and allow the crazy man to have his fun with the Sith. Eventually, Kavoo arrived, and Thrawn graciously greeted his sister for coming all the way out to Exegol to join the two of them. Thrawn caught Kavoo up on everything that had been discussed, as Plagueis told the two of them that he would need to test Kavoo for her midichlorian count. Kavoo was also fine with it, as Plagueis pricked her hand as well before he plunged the device into the awaiting result. While they waited, Kavoo and Plagueis got themselves acquainted with one another. Once the results were back, it was obvious that Kavoo was still Force-sensitive. Thrawn's older sister had a slight edge on him in terms of count of midichlorians, but it wasn't a very large count. She had a count of 25,000. Plagueis was still beyond impressed. He then asked Kavoo how she lost her ability to use the Force. She told him that when she became a woman, much like many from their homeworld, they were forced out of the Skywalkers, and the younger girls would be placed in for them. Plagueis shook his head. He told her that she lost her connection with the Force because during her transition into womanhood, she didn't adjust her style of the Force. When someone matured, the Force did with them. Plagueis respected the Jedi for doing that with their younglings, but it was obvious that both Thrawn and Kavoo could become a force to be reckoned with. Both of them were young and extremely physically fit. Plagueis saw this as a perfect opportunity to build himself the perfect allies for taking the fight back to Sidious. After all, Plagueis knew more than Sidious did, and with the element of surprise, they could become unstoppable. Though Plagueis planned around Thrawn and Kavoo going back to the Chiss ascendancy and abandoning him after this month. Regardless of assuming the outcome, Plagueis would train the very two seriously. They were both very capable adults, and there would be no sugarcoating for them. The benefit Plagueis had as a teacher with these two is that they were already physically fit enough to be qualified Sith Lords. The question was how quick these abnormally powerful beings would come into their own as Sith or just Force users. Plagueis would go softly on them. He wouldn't give them the whole Sith treatment. When working with functioning adults, he needed to make joining the Sith seem valuable. Plagueis couldn't simply train Thrawn and Kavoo the same way he did with Palpatine. That was because Palpatine was essentially a child. Plagueis was smart enough to use a Sith wit when he needed to avoid any issues when it became detrimental to his success. Plagueis' first lesson would be extremely basic, stuff that a youngling inside of the temple wouldn't be to struggle with. The challenge of teaching adults was the fact that they had lived their entire life up until that point with these powers but didn't know that they had them, which made them either unstable, impatient, or just plain impossible to teach. Plagueis was very wary of this, which is why he focused on a basic lesson. Luckily for Plagueis, Thrawn and Kavoo were extremely critical thinkers, and their good attitude towards learning concurrently allowed Plagueis to take full advantage of their individual skill sets that they offered to him. Within the first couple of days, Plagueis was able to ignite the spark within them, allowing them to access the very basic powers of the Force. This would be as simple as pushing or pulling small objects with the Force, or lifting others. There was a much larger world out there for the Chiss siblings to discover, and they were only on the verge. Though for Thrawn and Kavoo, they were exceedingly excited with each lesson they learned. They saw each lesson as an opportunity to better themselves as individuals. Both of them still had the notion in their mind that they would leave Plagueis behind, though. He hadn't really provided them any incentive to stay behind and stick with him. Though, as the day kept coming, Thrawn and Kavoo were able to capitalize off of their training. Their connection with the Force didn't just help them in normal tasks of being Force users, it helped them unlock a new array of abilities within their minds. Thrawn and Kavoo, being such capable thinkers, were able to use the Force to outstretch their minds and make a better connection with their mind through the Force. One could assume that they were already so capable as individuals because of the Force. Thrawn's progression at the academies and unstoppable record in simulations was easily explained away with all the success, just like Kavoo being a Skywalker was already easily explained away by these powers, though Plagueis knew that these two students were worth with or without the Force. They would have been incredible even if their midichlorian count hadn't been so high. It was just a luck of the draw for them being born with incredibly certainty in their minds, and even more so, the high amount of midichlorians that the two had. Plagueis was impressed at first. The first week went by and the two siblings became enraptured in their new abilities. It wasn't much, very basic force powers, but their movement from nothing to something was extremely rapid. It left the two of them yearning for more. As the second week came to an end, it was apparent both Thrawn and Kavoo what they stumbled upon was amazing. They found themselves inside of a goldmine of possibilities. Thrawn and Kavoo grew exponentially in a short amount of time, but the only reason they grew so fast is because of their continued trust in their teacher. Plagueis knew how to bring the best out of his students, which is exactly why Palpatine was so powerful, and within the first 2 weeks, Plagueis proved to himself that he was still such an incredible teacher. He may have almost died at the hands of Sidious, but these siblings were incredible. Plagueis knew what they could become. He just needed them to focus, use their strength from their passion, and allow it to explode within them. While Plagueis could have and even would have focused on the traditional teaching process of the Sith, he knew that Thrawn and Kavoo would likely stray away from him if they didn't feel they had to give up who they were to become Sith. And this plan that Plagueis created would work perfectly, as by the time the third week rolled around, Kavoo and Thrawn began practicing with lightsabers. Both were experienced with using staves, and they often practiced with one another. These siblings were extremely well trained in several martial arts, which made them fine combatants even without a staff. But for now, they combined everything they already had learned with their natural affinity for the Force, and they became an unstoppable duo. Plagueis found it even a bit emotional watching their rapid growth from two average individuals to two incredible forces to be reckoned with. While Plagueis knew he couldn't take all the credit for himself, he knew that because of the simplicity of his lessons and how they focused on the individual's growth rather than the focus of the Sith code, the two students were able to excel confidently. That's what Plagueis wanted. He wanted confident students, not those who were going to be subservient to him. Still intending on letting Thrawn and Kavoo off their leashes once the 4 weeks were done, he focused on getting as much important information into the two of them as he could. It was easier than it sounded. For Plagueis, he was able to set up to succeed because of the siblings' natural intelligence. By the time the 4th week rolled around, Thrawn and Kavoo were practicing with lightsabers and even using force jumps like it was naturally gifted to them. It was incredible to Plagueis. He knew he couldn't let them go, but part of him knew that in his current condition, he wouldn't be able to convince them otherwise. Plagueis watched them grow so fast, and he didn't want to lose that of which he had. It was very nice finally to have students again. It was even better to have company with no one around him. But as the 4th week edged closer to a conclusion, Thrawn and Kavoo showed no signs of wanting to stop. They wanted more information. They craved what it was that Plagueis could teach them, and teach them he would. Plagueis was enthralled that they were eager to continue learning from him, so that's what Plagueis focused on, giving them exactly what they wanted. While Plagueis was teaching the siblings, he was able to repair more of his own body, and set up a more functioning facility here on Exegol. Though it was time that Thrawn and Kavoo were introduced to the Sith Eternal. It was a group of Sith worshippers that lived on the planet, and they were extremely loyal to the Sith, essentially seeing them as gods. Plagueis would allow these siblings to feel the power of what it meant to be a Sith. He would organize a Sith Eternal in their arena, and he would allow the two siblings to spar with one another before these Sith worshippers. As Thrawn and Kavoo walked out, they were greeted like a home team. They were treated with the utmost respect, and they found love for the Sith Eternal. Neither Kavoo or Thrawn ever showed instances of appreciating people that sucked up to others, but the crowd egging them on, cheering for them, made the two of them realize the true potential that laid beneath their power. Though for Thrawn and Kavoo, they wouldn't let this lust for respect and power get to their head. They enjoyed the applause and the attention they received, but it was only an added benefit. It was just something to give them a little bit more excitement, not something for them to base themselves off of, and both siblings knew how to utilize the extra motivation to build themselves up. As the end of the month came, both Thrawn and Kavoo knew that they wanted to stay longer. While it could be seen as the two of them abandoning the Chiss ascendancy, both Thrawn and Kavoo made sure that their admiral was aware of what they were doing. The two of them were doing this for the Chiss and their greater expansion into the galaxy. There was a lot of unexplored land for them to discover, and these two knew that with the galaxy at their fingertips, they could bring power to the ascendancy. Plagueis allowed the students to come to him, and they came to him, requesting that they spend more time with him. Plagueis was very surprised by this motion by the siblings, but he was certainly not disappointed. He told them that he would complete their training, but they would not have to swear allegiance to him. Part of Plagueis feared the idea, but he knew that these two were not Sidious. Sure, they were more powerful than him with a midichlorian count, but they were not evil, dogmatic, nor vile as he. They were cold, calculated, and precise with every movement, having an intention behind it. It was this that Plagueis loved them for, because it made them terrific Sith, better than the lords of before. While it would take them several hours to complete their training, Plagueis knew he needed to get them out of their former Sith planets. He needed to enforce their continued knowledge. Plagueis knew how smart they were, and he needed them to go to Korriban, Kryus II, and anywhere else that the Sith had been, and find as much and learn as much as they could. These two could bring an era never seen before by the Sith. These two could not just see the Jedi crumble, but they could also be the first Sith with absolute control over the galaxy, with not a single soul able to stop them from their atrocities and whatever it was that they wanted. While Plagueis knew that these two didn't care for absolute power, he would take full advantage of that. He would allow them to have what they desired while he took the throne of the first Sith to ever take over the entire galaxy. Plagueis may have been undermined by Sidious, but it was truly Sidious who was undermined when he thought that Plagueis would have taught him everything there was to know about the Force. Plagueis' plan for revenge was brilliant, and it was only going to escalate from here. First, Plagueis had to continue training with the two siblings, which would take much longer than a month. While their progress was significant, their lust for knowledge made them even better than Plagueis could have ever foreseen. They still had a lot to learn though. Plagueis had a lot to teach them about the dark side abilities within the Force, and he also needed to break down lightsaber combat for them. While their training was relatively elite, Plagueis knew that they would become so much more if they learned every detail and every lesson that he taught the Sidious. But Plagueis wanted to avoid a couple of lessons, these lessons that made Palpatine even more of a maniac than he already was. Plagueis knew that these two would never be Sidious, but he wanted to still ensure that they didn't become anything like the Jedi Chancellor of the Republic. Months would begin to pass by, one after the other. Plagueis focused hard on the training as they accelerated through it rapidly. Their skills within the Force grew, and their knowledge of the dark side and what it had to offer grew exponentially. Plagueis would also get well acquainted with sparring with his students, as he began to develop a more advanced form of lightsaber combat. While the Chiss Ascendancy wasn't thrilled with these two abandoning their stations, the promise was certainly alluring and hopeful, though for now they had no reason to believe that this promise would ever be fulfilled. The training would eventually come and become more difficult. After all, there was a reason why Palpatine decided to kill his master in his sleep. If Plagueis was an easy match, then he would have done it so without the booze and the sleep. Plagueis kept holding on, and he held his own against the siblings, as he would prompt them to grow in their individual strength. At the same time, Plagueis' laboratory would begin to look functional. The Sith Eternals spent hours a day putting it together, and now it was a higher functioning than the one Plagueis had on Coruscant before he was murdered. Plagueis was enthralled to have the ability to focus on his studies again. It meant a lot to him to voyage into the Force. He wanted to be the first to learn everything he could about the Force, and while he had to retrace some of the steps that he had on Coruscant, he knew he could certainly accomplish this feat if he spent time on it. The difficulty was deviating time away from his students, of which he had become very attached to. The truth is that Plagueis didn't see Thrawn or Kavoo as students. He saw them as equals. He believed that they were certainly worthy of being called that. Sure, they were younger than him, but they were commendable, and they were respectable. Plagueis adored them for that ability to be highly respected. Sure, Palpatine was a politician, but these two were more than just that. They were higher-class thinkers, strategists, and they were more than what Sidious could have ever aspired to become. Part of Plagueis was worried that he was obsessing over Sidious, though. Maybe he was, but he couldn't focus on it if he wanted to. If he was or wasn't, there was too much at stake, especially with the training of these two. Thrawn and Kavoo, on the other hand, cemented their bond with one another as siblings. This bond allowed them to become tighter than ever before. In terms of their bond, they were something Plagueis would uncover to be the first Force dyads seen in a millennia. The two thrived off of one another, and because they consistently sparred with one another, they used each other for their collaborative growth. The two of them would adopt Form 7 just like their master used. Thrawn and Kavoo would thrive in a higher and highly aggressive form, and advanced lightsaber combat. As for their Force abilities, Kavoo would adopt all the normal advanced dark side abilities, alongside of one special one called Force Drain. Sometimes she would use it on Sith Eternal members who got too close to her personal residence. She liked her privacy, and those who didn't respect it paid. While Thrawn, on the other hand, adopted all the similar advanced forms, he used a special form of power called Thought Bomb. It was a hard-to-use power, much like Force Drain, but it was a power gifted to each sibling because it was theirs to use alongside of their natural persona. Drain belonged to Kavoo because she was a cunning and strong one with the Force, and her natural ability to thrive off of others allowed her to naturally bond with the power. As for her younger brother, the brilliant strategist was gifted with the ability to take the power of the Force away from those in a given area with the Thought Bomb. Plagueis was overwhelmingly impressed. He knew they would be impressive, but he would never assume that they would grow this fast into their own as such. Plagueis told the two that he would partake in trying to create life again, asking if they could assist him with this creation of life. While Thrawn and Kavoo didn't know what he meant, they came to understand that Plagueis meant through the Force rather than an actual natural creation process, which was kind of a funny inside joke for the three of them, but since the two siblings wanted to see what would happen if they tried to create a being with the Force. Plagueis figured out how to hone in on the Force and create beings that he wanted where he wanted without having to have a natural birth process. These beings would be summoned and born on Exegol. Instead of the one being that Plagueis was never able to find, he would use Exegol as a staging ground for his Sith army to rise from the ashes. Plagueis knew that Sidious would never find Exegol because it was the only home world of the Sith that his apprentice was never made aware of. Plagueis intended using the planet for refuge whenever it was that Sidious decided to be overzealous and try and strike his master down. As the three gathered in a laboratory, they would each find themselves forging together beings of the Force. Plagueis knew that the laboratory would be the best suited in the middle of the arena, because he wanted all the Sith Eternal members to remember who their masters were, to remember who had all the power, and to remember who their gods were. Plagueis wanted the Eternal to eternally remain loyal, which is exactly what he made sure happened. They would summon beings from the Force, and while that was all fun and games, all three of them created life, created different beings from across the stars with the Force, and then they came to realize the issue with tampering with the Force. A red Twi'lek Force-sensitive girl came through. Even more than that, an array of other beings were created from the Force. The Sith Eternal had their faith established in the Sith, as they watched them create being after being, until they got to the final one. Plagueis told the two that they would create one more being, and then it would take a break for a while to raise this group of 40 or so children. The final being summoned was a Force-sensitive Rancor. Plagueis almost jumped out of his skin when he saw the baby Rancor. Thrawn and Kavoo didn't know much about these beings. None of them were from the unknown regions, but even they were a bit startled by the larger beast. Plagueis came to realize that while he could create beings with the Force and dictate where they could be born, he could not dictate what they were. Maybe it was something he could work out, but right now he had a lot of training to commence, and a lot of children to turn into his army of Sith. Plagueis was also capable of figuring out how to create life without having to have a natural birth process take place. It was as the Force willed, and boom, a child was created. Plagueis would tell the siblings that they would need to complete their training by taking one of their Chiss vessels and going out across the galaxy to the Sith temples and absorbing as much information as they could. Plagueis told them that for the time of the Sith, they would rise, and it would be upon them. Within the next 2 decades, they would be in power. The two siblings nodded as they turned around and left Exegol. Being on Exegol afforded them so much. They had all the barren land in the galaxy to practice on, and they had each other to grow with. As Plagueis would soon uncover about the nature of their dyad, they were a special bond. Dyads could be formed with those who weren't related, but dyads formed between siblings allowed them to grow beyond the range of any average Force user by a normal Force wielder. The dyad between siblings was as strong as the siblings were themselves. This became obvious as the siblings stretched themselves out across the galaxy. They took a Chiss cruiser, and with such an escort they were able to find themselves in different places across the galaxy in great time. While brother and sister were out on their journey, the next several years would see great change take place. While Thrawn and Kavoo made incredible leaps in their development, Plagueis was also able to find a way to accelerate his achievements as a whimsical master of the Force. The children of the Force that he created had advanced incredibly. They were powerful beyond belief, and even better, the Sith had gone completely unnoticed by the ever-so-repugnant Galactic Chancellor and the irredeemable Jedi Order. Plagueis had everything he wanted and where he wanted it to be. A Sith army forging under his fingertips, two beings more powerful than Sidious, and behind a legion of individuals who saw the Sith as their gods. The true Sith Order had the opportunity for true success, without the need for politics and without the need for the Clone Wars. But it didn't matter. Sidious went along with his grand plan and started a Clone Wars. So Plagueis would instruct his peers to stay away from the combat as best as they could. While it wouldn't be easy, both Thrawn and Kavoo, excited to try their new powers out on some Jedi, would remain steadfast and patient. They knew that Plagueis was onto the right move. He had planned this out longer than Sidious was even alive, and he had only just been perfecting the plan to undermine Sidious, the Jedi, and of course the entire galaxy. With the Clone Wars beginning, the Jedi were thrown into a war that they didn't want. With the Chiss ascendancy expanding into the known galaxy, Thrawn would rejoin with his comrades. He did this to continue gathering intel while his sister stayed with Plagueis on Exegol. The past 13 years saw incredible growth from the two siblings. They learned everything with each other and only made one another more powerful. Though there were times that they had to separate. As close as a dyad as the two were, they were both individuals within that dyad, and as such they needed their own space from time to time as well. Thrawn would often go across the galaxy and continue his extravagant collection. One positive about this collection for Thrawn is that when he brought Sith relics back from the galaxy, Plagueis could also find something to do with them, to allow the relics to aid them in some way, shape, or form. Though Thrawn also liked to collect relics from the dead Sith, which aggravated their easily angered spirits. While Plagueis suggested against it, it actually came to aid of the Sith, as it created darkened holes around the Sith planets, of which an individual not strong with the Force could be corrupted. The Terror had just begun with the Clone Wars on advance, and Kavoo on Exegol with Plagueis. They were in the middle of training with those born so long before. Thrawn and the Ascendancy were out and about when, somewhere into the first year of combat, Thrawn came across a Jedi General by the name of Skywalker. While Thrawn was instructed that any Jedi were bad and that he hadn't experienced a Jedi before, so Thrawn decided he'd give it a try, especially since he never interacted with the Jedi. Also, Skywalker had the same name as what the Chiss called their Force-sensitive children, so Thrawn was as curious to study this as the Jedi was to study him. While Anakin was certainly an exception, Thrawn didn't know that. Their interaction went smooth, and Thrawn was hidden his essence from the Jedi so that he wouldn't recognize him as an enemy. Thrawn gained a respect from the Skywalker, and while there were several times when he could have assassinated the Jedi, he didn't do it because something told Thrawn that this boy would be able to aid him and his fellow Sith and do what they needed to do to take down the Jedi. Why Thrawn felt this? He didn't know, but he allowed Skywalker to return to the battlefront for the time being. The Chiss fleet would avoid conflict with the Republic or the CIS. With the Clone Wars taking place, the Sith would keep away from a war that wouldn't last as long as they would assume it would. The Clone Wars only lasted a very short 3 years, and while Sidious rose to Emperor of the Empire, the first stage of Plagueis' plan was complete. The Dark Lord knew that it would only be a matter of time before Sidious found Exegol, and while he didn't fear Sidious, he wanted to be sure that Sidious was wiped off the face of the galaxy before he and his goons ever discovered this location of the true Sith Order. Plagueis preferred that the name because it held principles of the Sith while being a testament to what true Sith power in the galaxy could look like. With none of the beings from Exegol or the two siblings knowing about the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the rise of Darth Vader, they did know that there were two Sith in the galaxy, a master and an apprentice. Thrawn was being sent undercover, as he was already a high-ranking Chiss officer. It was only natural for him to join the Empire. For Thrawn, it wouldn't be hard for him to excel through the ranks of the Imperials. The talent that came into the Empire was severely lackluster, and Sidious permitted inner fighting. It made sense, he was a Sith after all. But the real challenge for Thrawn would be hiding his identity from the Sith, whether that could be Sidious or Vader. During this time, he would continue to train, harvesting any Sith holocron that he came across and was able to get his hands on. Thrawn was filled with knowledge, and he used all of his cunning natural abilities and knowledge, and his strategic mind to rise to the Imperial ranks without a sign of stopping. Thrawn knew where he wanted to be, and so his way to get out of there was seamless. It was almost too easy for Thrawn. Because of his cunning logic, he would fool Imperial officers above him into making terrible decisions. It wouldn't take more than a year for the Emperor to notice this incredible Thrawn, who would make his way to Grand Admiral, commanding one of the very few first Imperial Star Destroyers. While the Empire was still using the Venator-class Star Destroyer, the new model of ship was far more powerful. Thrawn's acceleration through the Imperial ranks would tick off Vader. He thought it was something off with Thrawn, and while he served with him as Anakin Skywalker, something seemed more off than ever with Thrawn, and how he was so able to find victory and rise through Imperial ranks. Sidious called his apprentice foolish for not seeing the untapped potential of having someone like Thrawn leading the Imperial military, though for Sidious, he had to admit that there was something he liked more than blatantly loyal individuals, which is why Governor Tarkin was regarded so highly. Sidious would keep a close eye on Thrawn, but in his eyes he saw a victor find victory. He loved a victor. Sidious also made sure to throw that around in front of Vader to remind him of the embarrassing defeat he had on Mustafar. Vader lived a life of torture, and he couldn't escape it. It was very obvious that he was there, and there was nothing that anyone could do to stop Sidious from bombarding him with insults whenever he felt, and putting him down like the good slave that he was. It hurt Vader on the inside, but he obeyed his master's wishes. As the Empire grew, its challenges grew. Thrawn commanded a deck full of recruits and clone troopers, but when a group of clones rebelled, taking over a fleet of Venators, Sidious called up the Admiral to deal with it. It would be a great test for Sidious to allow Thrawn into all the top security meetings and allow him to be the most present member of the Imperial Navy. Thrawn would be dispatched as he would leave for Kamino. The clones rebelled once they found out that Tipoca City had been bombarded by the Empire, and it made the clones very upset. It was their only home. It was where all their brothers were born facing during the war, and they were going to stand up to the Empire. It was a sizable fleet, the average former Republic fleet, with a couple of Venators, Acclamators, and Arquentances. The fleet Thrawn commanded had a single ISD, and it also had a wing of its own backup ships, but nothing was as large as a Star Destroyer. The fleet was awaiting a few new ISDs off the assembly line at Kuat, but they didn't get there in time. This was all by Palpatine's design. The rebellion over Kamino was going to have Thrawn go in undermanned against a superior force. The plan was certainly secured. Sidious wanted Thrawn to ensure that he was the real deal, and so when Thrawn came out of hyperspace, his ISD, he realized that it was a trap. He told his men to put the shields up on full power on the Star Destroyer and launch all the fighters. There was a little chance that they could hold their own. Republic fleets carried much more fighters than most Imperial fleets with Star Destroyers did. After all, Venators were carriers, and Thrawn knew he was set up. He had a handful of anti-air corvettes as he rolled them around the front of the Star Destroyer to soak up some of the fighter damage. He also had Imperial Victory IIs, which were similar, flat-modeled ships. It was a support vessel, still being tested out by the era of Empire. Thrawn moved in the two Victory IIs around the Star Destroyer to open up their long-range cannons, which he would have to focus on the Acclamators. As amazing as the Venator was, it didn't have the firepower nor the shields of a single ISD. The rebel fleet would be squashed, and Thrawn would see its downfall. Thrawn watched as fighters came towards them. Their anti-fighter corvettes rolled around the Imperial Star Destroyer as Thrawn told the targeting computers on the men to fire at the support vessels. The men questioned it, but Thrawn demanded that they do it immediately. When they did, the smaller Republic vessels ripped apart, killing all the clone veterans inside of them. Thrawn turned around and then ordered the two Victory IIs to the far side of the flank, asking that the corvettes cover them to the far port side. The fleet separated as the two Venators began to bear down on the ISD. Thrawn told the command deck to focus all firepower forward, demanding that they pick a Venator and lay into them. As the fleet dispersed, the Republic's support vessels exploded, and the Venators stood between Thrawn and victory. Between the Venators, they were focused on a larger target. They didn't see the support ships make their way around the corner. The Imperial Star Destroyer bared its cannons down on the two Venators as their shields began to deteriorate. With the support fleet in position, Thrawn gave the orders as they both opened fire on the Republic vessels, ripping them apart. Thrawn smiled, a victory too easily won. With another victory under the bag for Thrawn, he was requested back to Coruscant. Thrawn was excited. This was the moment he was waiting for. Sure, a bit soon for Plagueis, but Thrawn knew that this would be the perfect time to strike. Vader was clearly still not fully equipped with his suit yet, still struggling to get used to being Vader, and even using the suit, still badly burned from his encounter with Kenobi. And the Empire was still weak enough where a new Emperor could assume control with ease, and win the hearts of the Empire by demanding a change happen. Thrawn would be ushered back to Coruscant as he found himself in the Emperor's chambers. Still inside the Senate building, Thrawn walked into the room with prowess and a can't-lose cards as he demanded the attention of the Emperor and everyone present. The Emperor demanded that everyone in the room leave him. He was enthralled with Thrawn, and he wanted to talk to him alone. He believed that Thrawn was a perfect fix to the militaristic issues that the Empire had been having. Surprising, considering that it was the Empire who technically won the Clone Wars. Regardless, as Sidious began to speak, the door slammed open. It was Vader. Thrawn thought he was caught as Vader came in pointing at Thrawn, demanding that Sidious terminate him. Thrawn played it cool as he looked at Sidious confusedly. The Emperor demanded that Vader halt, but he didn't stop as he ignited his lightsaber to kill Thrawn. Sidious stood from his seat and shot lightning at his apprentice as he watched the metallic beast crumble to the ground. Sidious asked why the haste action from his apprentice. Vader groaned in pain as electricity ran throughout the circuits and stabbed into his burnt skin. Sidious walked out from behind the desk as he looked down on the ground and his apprentice, who lay in isolated pain. Sidious demanded to know why Vader acted as such. Vader's blade rolled away from his hand as Sidious looked at the blade, wondering how or why it was doing that without him or Vader moving it. Then, before Sidious could make a move, Thrawn pulled out of his shirt his lightsaber and ran it through Sidious's spine as he dragged the blade down, cutting Sidious's ability off from him to move. Thrawn looked down at Sidious, who howled out in pain, and then jabbed a lightsaber through the Sith Lord's head. Vader groaned as he tried to escape. Thrawn snickered as he spoke delicately and lightly, asking how the legendary Anakin Skywalker could have fallen so low. Vader didn't know how Thrawn knew it was him, but Thrawn was strong with the Force, and it didn't matter. Thrawn pulled Vader's lightsaber with the Force as he ignited it alongside of his own blade. Thrawn walked towards Vader and slashed at him, cutting him down without giving him a chance to say a word. Thrawn pulled Sidious's lightsaber with the Force towards him as he looked down at it. Royal guards ran into the room as they found their dead Emperor and the dead Darth Vader. They demanded that Thrawn stand down, but he would not do such a thing as he snickered to all of them, telling him that he was their new Emperor. Those who didn't obey would be executed for high treason against the Empire. The Royal Guards had no option. Sidious was dead, and Thrawn was currently the highest-ranking individual in the room. Not just that, but the entire Empire as well. He'd gained Sidious's trust by using everything he knew about Sidious from Plagueis against him. It turned out Plagueis was really a mastermind. Thrawn moved to the seat and told the two guards to remove the bodies of those who were laying on the floor, and then he asked that Vader's helmet be kept for him as a trophy. The guards did as he asked as they removed the bodies from the room. Thrawn would contact his peers on the far side of the galaxy. He told them that it had been done. Sidious was now dead. Plagueis was surprised and partially disappointed. He wanted the opportunity to kill Sidious. Revenge was meant to be his. He didn't know if he could live with the fact that it was stolen from Thrawn himself. Plagueis sent Kivu all the way to Coruscant to meet up with her brother. Plagueis was very unhappy. He'd spent so much time preparing for the downfall of Sidious, and Thrawn selfishly took it upon himself to do it. Plagueis sat alone in his laboratory. He thought about everything they'd gone through in the past decade and a half. There was a lot of positives, but this was a big negative. Plagueis knew that if he did something, he would have been breaking the code of the true Sith Order that they had established. There would be no conquest for power, but Plagueis had a Sith army. They were all loyal to him, and while the main group that could fight was the original 40, there would be more that would be ready. Plagueis thought about it. deciding if it would be worth it or not to turn against his students that he trained. Eventually, Kavoo would reunite with her brother, after not seeing him for more than a year. She embraced him and then told him that Plagueis was going to be a little mad. Thrawn didn't need any explanation, he understood. Plagueis was jealous of their bond, and he was jealous of their power. Thrawn knew that the Sith weren't sustainable. Neither were the Jedi. Kavoo agreed with her brother. She expressed that Plagueis was getting more and more irritable over that same time that Thrawn was gone, coming up with conspiracies, believing that Thrawn had betrayed him, and while Kavoo knew it wasn't true, Thrawn killing Sidious would have set off the ticking time bomb within Plagueis. Thrawn and Kavoo knew that they would likely have to kill the students they trained, but they also played the perfect location to prepare for this match, the Jedi Temple. The duo knew that they had to ensure they came out on top, so they went to the remnants of the fallen Jedi Temple before Thrawn addressed the Empire about what had happened to their Emperor. The trap would be laid. The Master Tactician and his older sister sat inside of the Great Hall of the Jedi Temple. It was still ruined, but there was scaffolding everywhere. Sidious was going to build his palace inside of here. Within the span of a couple hours, the night would silence inside of the Jedi Temple, but the sounds of feet wouldn't. Thrawn and Kavoo knew it was time. Kavoo reminded her brother to remember the lesson that they were taught during the Clone Wars. Thrawn stood up and grinned as he reached around and ignited his lightsaber, standing back into his Form 7 position as his older sister quickly did the same thing. Plagueis walked into the temple first as he growled, saying he couldn't believe that Thrawn would just betray him. Thrawn had no clue what he was talking about, but it was evident that Plagueis had gone mad as he ignited his lightsaber and hailed all of his children forward. 40 members of the true Sith Order all ran forward, and then the ground began to rattle. The Rancor child had grown, still small but much larger than anyone else, as it crushed down the entrance into the soon-to-be palace for the former Emperor. Thrawn and Kavoo moved forward as Thrawn used his thought bomb and summoned it in the middle of the group of Force users, as a third of them dropped to the ground from their running. Thrawn ran forward as he leaped into the air, as his sister used Force Drain as her brother flew over the red bolts of Force energy. Kavoo then pulled her lightsaber around as she commenced in a duel. Plagueis watched eagerly as the children began surrounding the first students. Thrawn and Kavoo saw that they were stuck. They swung violently as they tried to hold their own. As siblings, they needed to have each other's backs, and so that's what they focused on, having each other's backs. Thrawn pushed Kavoo forward as she used Force Lightning to splash through some of the students. The Rancor then stepped on a few more, still reckless, as normal as a Rancor would be, but then it reached out its arm and sent the brother and sister tumbling back. Plagueis at the entrance smiled as he laughed. The two got back up as they stood side by side, summoning a force torrent around the Rancor, winds wrapping around the Rancor like tight cables around a Star Cruiser hyperdrive, as they pushed and pulled, as the winds tore the Rancor limb from limb. Thrawn and Kavoo ignited their lightsabers again as the Rancor dropped dead, holding on whatever they could, wherever they could, using their enemies as leverage as the two blasted their foes back and forth as they dove into a tense action. Plagueis watched in amusement as it turned into a slight concern. He ignited his own blade once again and stepped forward. Plagueis then watched as the children enclosed around the brother and sister. Thrawn and Kavoo were fighting for their lives. Wherever they were, they had to make sure a lightsaber was not. While they were certainly impressive duelists, these children were even more so. Thrawn and Kavoo struck back and forth, trying their hardest to avoid damage as Plagueis continued to laugh. It looked like the end for this brother and sister, the end of the legacy of the Chiss to be proud of. Plagueis grinned as he got closer and closer to the circle, holding his lightsaber outstretched. Thrawn threw himself back as he tried to get his sister a clear shot, but it was no use. There was nowhere for them to go, as they fell down lower and lower to the ground, hoping for the opportunity to try and get out of this fools damned by their master. Plagueis didn't know and didn't let them have a final word. But when everything seemed primed for victory, all the children turned their attention to their master, as if they wanted to ensure they had the right command to kill the brother and sister duo. But they weren't searching for orders. They were in shock to see Plagueis' life end right before their eyes. A red Twi'lek, the pride of her class. Talon stood tall with her lightsaber through the father's chest. The children ran over, but it was no use. Plagueis was dead, and Talon was joining the other side. She and Kavoo had a tight bond, almost sisterly, and Talon wouldn't let her sister and brother die. She would rather run and turn against these creations of the Force than turn against the people that trained her. And while Talon herself was a creation of Plagueis, she wasn't going to side with the fools that followed him blindly. The dyad of brother and sister had their open opportunities. They struck down their opponents. There was a little chance for them to mess up. Thrawn and Kavoo were fast as lightning and as strong as thunder. They moved in as a duo of power, and their essence of darkness flowed through them. Talon threw Plagueis' lightsaber at her peers as she swung hers around and met blades with her opponents. She stood tall against adversity, and there was nothing these children could do to stop her, Thrawn and Kavoo. Thrawn and Kavoo were putting an end to the legacy of their former master, as they cut down these little maniacs. Within the span of a couple minutes, Thrawn, Kavoo, and Talon cleared the floor with Plagueis' students. There was nothing left but corpses. Thrawn and Kavoo were very thankful to Talon for sticking by their side. Without her, they would have lost. Kavoo asked Talon why she would turn on the father, and she said that she was unlike her peers. She knew how to think for herself, and so she did. It may have been her sticking out from the crowd, but she'd rather be an individual than an errand boy like the rest of those that were slain. Finally, Talon had a lot of love and respect for Thrawn and Kavoo, so she didn't want to abandon them. Talon wanted to know what came next. Thrawn admitted that they needed to convince the rest of the children in Exegol that Plagueis turned against them, and that the three of them stopped him and his children from going mad and ending the legacy of the true Sith Order. Thrawn told the two of them that he would address the Senate, claiming the throne from Sidious. Kavoo and Talon expressed that they would take hold of the forces on Exegol. While Thrawn was able to secure a peaceful transfer of power because he was well known for his heroic tactics in the Empire, the majority of the public would have no issue with him becoming the Emperor, especially since he would unite the Chiss ascendancy with the Empire. The two powerhouses united together. Talon and Kavoo would also take hold of Exegol forces and take them across the galaxy to recruit the children of the Force. This would lead Thrawn and Kavoo to the Skywalker children. While Yoda wasn't around to protect Leia, Obi-Wan was around to protect Luke. While this battle between Kenobi, Kavoo, and Talon was short, it would see the former Jedi Master dead, and the uncle and aunt of Luke dead too. Luke and Leia would be brought into the true Sith Order, and trained by Thrawn and Kavoo in the dark side of the Force. For the Empire, it would thrive under Thrawn and Kavoo. That would rule with a joint leadership. The remaining Jedi would be hunted down and defeated. As for the galaxy, it would thrive. Thrawn and Kavoo weren't true Sith, and so they didn't make people suffer for simply existing. The Sith Order was essentially abandoned. As for Talon, she would become their apprentice, and she would help them hunt down traitors and troublemakers. It would also be Talon who would kill Darth Maul. While Thrawn and Kavoo would outlive most of their students, including Luke and Leia, it was their empire that would stand the test of time, and it would be their empire that would not falter to any rebellion. It would be their empire that staked its claim to power in the galaxy without anyone being able to stop them from their leadership over the galaxy and the peace it would bring to everyone. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, and Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so we can see what if Anakin fought Sidious during Revenge of the Sith. Video you definitely don't want to miss. If you want to see what if, let me know below. Or comments about crossovers. Check out the Twitch community Discord and Patreon if you want to be part of the community and somewhere out of the ways. And if you want to learn how to win in our giveaway, we are shooting for 50,000 subscribers, so hit that subscribe button. When we hit 50,000 subscribers, I'll give away 3 lightsabers. I've done it before, so we're going to do it again. Go down below, there's a pinned comment. There's a doc on that pinned comment. You just write your name on the doc, and that's how you win. It's simply as simple as that. I will announce winners in a video after we hit 50,000 subscribers. Again, smash that subscribe button and that like button, share, and all that stuff. Let's talk about our story, because that's why we're all here. This one is certainly interesting. Now, I believe that talking about Thrawn as a Sith was really an interesting counterpoint. It was suggested, I think, in a comment section once upon a time, and I was like, that's kind of cool, and I put it down on a list, and I just got a thumbnail for it, so I was like, all right, let's go with it. And I thought it'd be something interesting, different, and a lot of fun. Now, I didn't want to go too deep into like the actual story of Thrawn, because honestly it's gonna get boring. I just couldn't be bothered. I kind of started setting it up where I was going to talk about the whole thing with Thrawn, and then I read through all the information and I was kind of like, yeah, this is just not fun. It's just not a fun story. It's kind of boring. There's a lot of characters that you don't know, I don't know, and honestly I don't want to disassociate you from anyone like that. So I decided to bring us back to somewhere familiar. Now, they're in the unknown regions, and the only unknown region planet that belonged to the Sith is Exegol. And I didn't know Thrawn had a sister until I did this video. I kind of like found it in like the first like paragraph or the first couple paragraphs. I was like, oh really? So I was like, perfect. I can add a sister to this. It has nothing to do with the Anakin and his sister thing that was from the other day. It just happened to be luck of the draw. I was like, oh, okay, I'll take full advantage of this. So that's what I did. And I originally was gonna have them. I was originally gonna have Thrawn like discover an ancient Sith, and then I was like, nah, I've done that too many times. I want to do something different. Obviously, I've done different Sith. I've done Exar Kun. I've done Nihilus. I've done, I think, Darth Bane. I don't know about that one, but I've done a bunch of different Sith before, and I was like, I want to do something different. I want to do something where I bring somebody that we all know and love, and that is Darth Plagueis. And I thought having Darth Plagueis as the main bad guy would be very interesting, but also I kind of wanted to set it up so that he would be the main antagonist throughout the entire video, and it's kind of in the background and you don't notice it. There's a couple of lines that I throw in there just to kind of hint at him betraying, but at the end of the day, he's going to end up being the mastermind that tries to take it down to these two twins, and they're just a dyad. And every video I usually change up the rules of the dyad of the Force, so I want to keep that clear for those of you that are like, oh, but it's not that. I know it's not that. I change up the rules every video. It doesn't follow the lines of what JJ put into Rise of Sky Guy. I just follow my own rules depending on the video. It's kind of like an ex machina, but I don't really see it as that because I just kind of rewrite the rules for what a dyad means when it just fills the story better. And for this one, I wanted it to be siblings. I think I did it in another video with Luke and Leia, or maybe yeah, I think it was Luke and Leia being a dyad in the Force. And I figured that having a sibling connection, I don't have any siblings, but I'm sure those of you that do have siblings know that you guys are kind of similar in some way, shape, or form, even if you don't want to admit it. And I think having a sibling connection would make a dyad in the Force stronger. But overall, I think Thrawn would have been an amazing Sith. I think he would have been incredible. I mean, this guy was a genius. And I place his midichlorian count higher than Sidious's because I wanted him to be the most powerful Sith ever. And I know that Plagueis probably would have noticed that. And I think Plagueis would have been really focused on actually rebuilding himself. But I think he still would have tried to kill Thrawn and kind of gone a little bit mad at some point in time because he was exerting so much Force power to create life. Also, for those of you that are in the Discord, special shout out to you guys. You got your Force-sensitive Rancor, because I thought that'd be kind of fun. So there he is, the Force-sensitive Rancor, sadly destroyed by a torrent of Force. But, but no, I mean, you know, I wanted to have fun with this, and I think Thrawn would have been a brilliant Sith. I wanted to take advantage of his tactical maneuvers, which is why I had him use some tactics in the story. You don't get a lot of tactics from Thrawn in the story, which I know kind of takes away from the character, but I gave that special moment where he uses an ISD to take down a rebel fleet, essentially, and I thought that'd be more fun than just kind of like skipping over the fact that he's a brilliant tactician. I wanted him to be a brilliant tactician, but also a brilliant Sith, which kind of works hand in hand, I believe, in my opinion. Having a brilliant Sith comes with being a brilliant tactician. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Got a couple of dark stories back to back. I know you guys have been begging for those. We're going to have another story tomorrow, and I'm excited, or maybe not tomorrow, but, you know, in the next coming days for Anakin versus Sidious, so I'm very excited about that. So, build the hype. You know, guys, what to do. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.